Shadow Hollow. The name itself whispered secrets. It hinted at things unseen, unheard. The village graveyard lay forgotten. Weeds choked the crumbling headstones. Ancient oaks clawed at the sky, their branches bare and gnarled. They cast long skeletal fingers of shadow across the overgrown graves. No birds sang in those trees. Only silence lived there. Generations of villagers rested in Shadow Hollow. Their names faded on the weathered stones. Their stories, once vibrant, were now as silent as the dust that covered them. But some stories refused to die. Whispers lingered among the graves. They spoke of restless souls trapped between worlds and of Ilara. Ilara, a young girl taken too soon. Her story was a tragedy whispered on the wind. They said she wandered the graveyard searching for something she'd lost. Some claimed to hear her, a faint cry, a sigh on the breeze. Her voice, they said, was haunting, beautiful yet filled with an unbearable sadness. It drew you in, made you want to comfort her. But to look upon her face, to truly see her sorrow, that was a risk few dared to take. The villagers spoke of Ilara in hushed tones. Mothers warned their children not to speak her name. "Ilara will hear you," they'd say, their eyes wide with fear, "and she will come for you." Autumn had painted the village in shades of decay. Crimson and gold leaves swirled on the wind, mimicking the dance of dying embers. The air grew colder, sharper. The veil between the living and the dead felt thin. It was on such a night, under the glow of a harvest moon, that a group of villagers gathered at the edge of Shadow Hollow. They were young, their blood still warm with a youthful recklessness. They dismissed the stories of Ilara as mere superstition. Tonight they would prove it. The iron gate groaned as they pushed it open, the sound heavy with warning. The air inside the graveyard was different, still heavy and strangely cold. A shiver ran down their spines, but they pressed on. The moon cast long, distorted shadows. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was the smell of death, the smell of forgotten things. Their laughter, once brave and defiant, died in their throats. The deeper they ventured into Shadow Hollow, the heavier the silence became. It pressed down on them, suffocating them. They stopped before a particularly imposing oak, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes. This was the heart of Shadow Hollow, the villagers whispered. This was where Ilara's sorrow was strongest. The air grew colder still. One of the villagers, a boy named Thomas, held up a lantern. Its flickering light danced across the weathered headstones, creating eerie, dancing shadows. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of their courage. And then they heard it, a whisper, faint at first, like the rustle of leaves, but it grew louder, clearer. A child's voice, filled with a sorrow that seemed to seep into their bones. The whisper swirled around them, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke of loss, of loneliness, of a pain so profound it echoed through time. Ilara's sorrow. They huddled closer together, their bravado crumbling in the face of this unseen presence. Their hearts pounded against their ribs, each beat a frantic drum in the suffocating silence. The lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed around them. The wind moaned through the trees, a mournful symphony that sent chills down their spines. They were no longer skeptics, they were believers. A glimmer in the darkness. And then, through the thick fear that clouded their senses, they saw it. A flicker of movement in the distance. A figure shrouded in shadow gliding silently between the graves. It was too far to make out any details, but there was something about the way it moved, something about the way it seemed to melt into the darkness that sent a jolt of pure terror through their veins. Ilara. The name, unspoken, hung heavy in the air between them. Their eyes were wide with terror, their breath caught in their throats. Flight through the night. Panic seized them. Turning, they fled. They ran blindly, their fear lending them speed. The sound of their own ragged breathing echoed in their ears, drowning out the whispers, the rustling leaves, the mournful sigh of the wind. They didn't dare look back. They didn't need to. They could feel her presence behind them, cold and ethereal, like a shadow cast by the moon. Through the tangled undergrowth, over crumbling headstones, they ran until they burst out of the graveyard gates, gasping for breath, their hearts pounding against their ribs like trapped birds. The lingering chill. They huddled together, trembling as the adrenaline slowly drained away, leaving behind a residue of bone-deep fear. They didn't speak, but their eyes, wide and haunted, spoke volumes. They had looked into the face of the unknown, and it had looked back. And in that brief, terrifying glimpse, they had seen something that would forever change them. The night was silent now, save for the sound of their own ragged breathing. But the air still held a chill, a lingering reminder of the cold that emanated from Shadow Hollow. A reminder of Ilara. Shadow Hollow's embrace. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory lingered, a dark stain on their souls. They avoided Shadow Hollow, their laughter no longer echoing through its ancient trees. Ilara's story, once a mere legend, had become a chilling reality. They carried it with them, a constant reminder of the unseen world that existed just beyond the veil of their own. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the trees, they could almost hear her voice again. A mournful sigh echoing through the darkness. Ilara, forever lost, forever searching in the cold embrace of Shadow Hollow.